Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Afternoon, Shabbar. I'm hot. How are you?
I'm hot as well. We are recording on Monday, the 22nd of June, and it's going to touch sort of 34, 35 today. And I'm feeling quite warm in my little
Yeah.
office without windows and
Yeah.
aircon, which I'm rather jealous of because people on the other side of the building have aircon that's working, and my side of the building isn't. So hey ho, we will crack
Just,
on.
just a metaphor for the world. Half of the world manages to deal with extreme heat because they have technology and capacity and resources to respond. And I'd say more than half the world. Just so people know, we're at the beginning of a week in the UK predicted to have absolutely unprecedented levels of heat. Dangerous, I would say scary. So yes, I've been talking to Shabba with some frustration about how we are now living through still the beginnings of some, I think, profoundly disturbing shifts in our way of life that have been predicted very clearly and spoken about by scientists and some economists, not most, and some politicians, not most, for 30, 40, 50 years. So it seems a very relevant week, and maybe I'm hot and bothered right now, but it seems a very relevant week to continue our little mini series.
Yeah,
And just as a quick reminder for people listening, if you're new to the podcast, this episode is a bit more out there and a bit more sort of society and politics based. So this episode is a little bit more looking at the bigger picture, global economics, global politics. For newer listeners, that's not mainly what we do. We mainly look at our individual money stories, but we're doing this mini series really on how our own individual money stuff and money consciousness and unconsciousness plays out in the wider world. So although we'll talk bigger picture stuff, we will keep bringing it back to us and our money stories and changes we can make. So we're hoping to talk big picture and personal
yeah.
today.
I think it's fascinating because even though we're talking sort of like big picture, and this sort of stemmed from I call it my exploration, which is leading me down the rabbit hole, and the book that I was consuming, Less is More, about degrowth by Jason Hickel. This was fundamentally like the main crux of what he was saying, that this pursuit of more, the incessant sort of drive towards growth for growth's sake, is having a tremendous detrimental effect on our ecology. And we're sort of witnessing this firsthand. I find it fascinating that people still brush it under the carpet. And despite everything that's going on around us and the signs being very visible, but I like the way that the bigger picture also reflects and translates into the individual way that we show up with the money and choices that we make. And so I think everything's so interlinked in this
Yeah.
field that as you start tugging on one area, you realize that it's affecting another, which you had no idea it was actually related to in the first place. But it's all like a woven tapestry, like this stuff that we
It
deal
is
with.
a woven tapestry. The word many people would use for that is it's systemic. We're talking about a complex system, a kind of an ecological system linked to a human system and an economic system and a personal system and a collective system. And humans aren't great at thinking about that. Actually, human wisdom traditionally has been much better at responding that more through, you might say, indigenous ways of knowing or very ancient ways of knowing or embodied ways of knowing, all of which link with what we've talked about on the podcast, the life path, the part of us that isn't stuck in our thinking and our calculations and our numbers and our constant self-talk. There is a part of all humans that is more in touch with this very complex, interrelated, systemic nature of things. Unfortunately, and we'll get more into this later today, we've been taught for the last few hundred years to devalue that and repress it and ignore it and believe in the supremacy of the thinking mind. And now we're going, blimey, well, yeah, we seem not to be able to quite cope with what we're doing to the environment, etc. So, yeah, we are talking about systemic challenges. Humans have responded more wisely historically in all cultures to those. And it's not to do with being clever up here. It's a different sort of intelligence. And on the Money Workshop and in our podcast, when we talk about life path and money path, which regular listeners will have heard us talk about a lot, that's shorthand actually for these two different ways of relating to the world. And as we say on the personal level, if you base your life only on or primarily on the money path, which is about numbers and some measurable goal, you very often miss what's important in your life at your peril. Well, it's true for the world as a whole. And that brings us right onto this question of growth and consumption.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just hand over to you because last time in the previous episode, we talked about the three stories. This is from my friend John Alexander, the three stories of who we are in a society. And John, I think, very neatly sums it up as first we were subjects ruled by some ruler, king, chieftain. Then more recently, we've become consumers and we're all individuals and our job is to consume and we're called consumers. Business will talk about consumers and more that language is creeping into universities. So people are no longer students because they are now buyers of consumers of university. That changes university education. So this consuming metaphor arguably goes into things like politics as well. We talk on the day where the Prime Minister's announced he's going to resign. We're going to get the seventh Prime Minister in the last, I think, 10 years or so. Arguably, that's all about consumer. It's like, well, I don't like you. Let's have another one. It's a kind of a throwaway, superficial. If I don't get what I want, I'm just going to throw out the old one and buy or get a new one. So there's an argument that this consumer identity we're in is very damaging in many ways. And where we got to last time was the possibility of a citizen identity rather than a consumer. And you rather like that idea. So before we dive back into consumption and growth, just what did you like about this idea that we could be citizens rather than consumers?
I'll come on to that in just a second. For those that watch on YouTube, there was just a point where I just broke into smile and I'm giggling to myself around this. We're consumers when you raised the issue around university. And whenever I speak to anyone around sort of what podcasts you listen to, the word that comes out is I consume. And it's quite funny because I'm consuming this at the moment, like in terms of, and that's like knowledge or wisdom or whatever it is that you're listening to, but you just see it as consumption.
Yes.
Which is very strange. I've never
It's
even
very
thought
strange.
about it.
And I would argue you cannot consume wisdom. The moment you think you're consuming wisdom, it's not wisdom anymore.
Expand on that just a little, if you can.
Well, okay, we're going a bit left field, so I hope this is okay for listeners. I think it was T.S. Eliot who said, I'm probably getting this quote wrong. He said something like this, or I'm paraphrasing him or someone who paraphrased him. Where is the information that we've lost in data? Where is the knowledge that we lose in information? And where is the wisdom that we lose in knowledge? In other words, the further away you go from data that you can observably measure and name, and then information, which are kind of things, facts, chunks, stats, then you go to knowledge. Well, to really know a field, if I'm a surgeon or a banker or a sports coach, I might have data and I might have information, but my knowledge kind of goes somewhere that you can't quite see and measure. I might use information, but my knowledge is something deeper, right? And then to have wisdom, it goes even deeper. You can't even say it's knowledge. It's maybe something back to where you started. It's more holistic or more systemic. My wisdom might relate to information and data and knowledge, but it's sort of more about something I've intuited or absorbed or patterns I recognize without knowing it. The point is, the further you go to deeper knowledge and wisdom, and arguably that's what humans really need right now, the less it's something you can consume. Maybe wisdom takes a long time. Maybe wisdom, often we become wise when we have very difficult, painful, surprising life experiences, right? That's not data or information. So if I listen to 1,000 podcasts with very wise people, arguably I'm being informed by their wisdom, but don't think I'm consuming wisdom. I'm consuming words and consuming ideas. And ideally, maybe somehow that helps me become wise. But even the idea by consuming podcasts of wise people, I will become wise. Even that to me is a superficial, consumerist,
Mm.
materialist approach.
I think this could be this could be the difference between knowledge and wisdom and how it applies
Yeah.
to the money and life work. I
Yes.
think that could be another episode. I'm gonna thank you for sharing that. That's super interesting for me. And coming back to your questions, what intrigued me is that I've lived my life and I felt kind of, even though like the sort of the era of the subject has been and gone, in terms of we're no longer under the rule of a lord or a king or an authority. I felt like a subject in terms of my passive approach to
Mm.
life and not
Mm.
engaging and not feeling like I've got agency or power. Or maybe it's just not something that's been passed down to me from my parents because of the fact that they were immigrants to this, country. Keep your head down, work hard, sort of like build and sustain yourself, etc. Don't get involved in, things that you don't really have much control over, etc. So I've always lived my life as a bit of a subject stroke consumer, and I found myself in that bracket, without feeling agency, without feeling power. This is the way it is. This new exploration has opened this sort of idea around it's okay to challenge, to think differently and look at alternative ways. But now this idea of citizenship does give a spark of,
Mm.
yeah, there are like-minded people that also think in this sort of new way of approaching the world and how we act and interact. And it feels quite liberating and scary at the same time, because I think there's a narrative that's just pushed down that this is the way, and to question is foolish, because
Mm.
these are sound economic principles that have stood up and been adopted by the masses, and therefore to question them means that you're backward, you're anti-growth, you anti-business, anti-profit, all of those things that kind of get
Mm.
labeled around by people that it serves them to push the opposite.
You're a bit queer. You're a bit economically queer or capitalistic
Yeah.
queer. You don't fit in. You're quirky. You're a
Yeah,
deviant.
bit of a
Yeah.
tree hugger at the extreme of the
Yeah.
climate stuff, right? It's the
Yeah.
derogatory slurs that keep you stuck where you are. That's sort of my immediate thing, where the citizen sort of analogy really brought some sort of energy.
Well, John will be thrilled, and it's very important to think there are more and more movements of people like you questioning and thinking about their passivity and their agency, and it's hard. It's hard. So what we're going to do today is dive more into the consumer story, because I think in our exploration of growth and what would be a life path for us individually, but for society, really thinking, well, what would it be like if everyone woke up and really felt that they were powerful, agentic, free citizens? You can even imagine how quickly that might change things. And so to have the citizen story is very powerful, and examples of that. And I can see it excited you. And another way to help us do that is to understand how strong this story of consumption and growth is, and how and why it's so easy to fall into it or assume that's what life should be about. So that's what we're going to dive into today. And I wanted to start with two things you said. I think it wasn't the previous podcast, maybe the one before that, when we did our very first
Mm.
introduction. You talked about your phrase, the power of growth, that this growth story is really powerful, right? Uh, And then you talked about the pursuit of more, how somehow on quite a deep level, it's very easy for us to believe in growth. As long as things grow, whatever they are, that's better. And on a personal level, or even as a country or a society or a business, we think we have to pursue more money. Well, let me hand over to you. Say more about the power of growth and the pursuit of more. And to me, those are wrapped up in identifying as consumers rather than citizens. But what do you think?
So for me, this is just a belief that has been handed down through economics, being studied at university, going out into the world where predominantly I'm in a community of entrepreneurs, businessmen who are looking to accumulate and build. And then I would say from a society or a government level that has always kind of pushed this idea that through growth, we all become richer. Society will become better. There'll be more money available for all of the wonderful things that, will enrich our lives and make life better for everyone because the economy will be growing and therefore everyone gets a bigger slice of the pie. That is my kind of snapshot view of what the growth message is all about.
So let's just
Ultimately, we'll all be better off if we're
okay.
growing.
I know there's more to it. Let's just pause there because I think you're right. I just want to capture it and you tell me if I've got it right. So the story, mainstream, conventional politics, economics is things need to grow, by which they mean GDP or numbers or productivity. So a certain subset of things need to grow. We'll come on to that, but I don't think they're talking about growing in wisdom or growing in
No.
surrender to God or growing in love. I think they're saying certain metrics to do with
Yeah, a number.
industrial, right? The number needs to grow. And the reason the number needs to grow is because somehow, and sometimes they'll show their workings and often they won't because it's become such a powerful story. Somehow the faith is if the right numbers grow, there's more for everyone, there's more for society, and we all get more of what we want and need as humans. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
We're going to eradicate a lot of the problems that the world faces,
Right.
i.e.
Right.
poverty,
Yeah.
being under-resourced, all of those things. They're going to be solved through this pursuit of a bigger number growth.
And that's been the trickle-down promise, which has been a kind of economic idea.
Yeah.
That sort of what do they say? A rising tide floats all boats. And, the reason we shouldn't be worried if there are billionaires and now trillionaires and a small percentage of people owning more and more is because somehow everybody benefits.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got these two stories at the moment. You've got a small but growing questioning, which I think is linked to this idea we're discussing of, is it really right we have billionaires and trillionaires? And a sense that maybe they're not benefiting the world all that much, or maybe there's something about having billionaires and trillionaires that doesn't actually uplift everybody. So there's that, and is growth in itself really helpful? What about the pursuit of more? Where does that fit in, either for a society or for us as individuals in all of this?
Well, for the individual, and I can only speak for myself and maybe the clients that I serve, there's two branches of this. There's the material sort of acquisition of more things, which somehow translates into a feeling that I'm progressing, I'm doing better, and being fulfilled through purchases. So that's what direct consumption of things. And then there's the accumulation mentality of the more I can invest, the more I can grow my number. And I link that as well to a type of consumption mentality of going after more, one from pure consumption, one from sort of an investment angle.
Right.
And I've been trying to think about this a lot and what's underpinning it. And I think one of the core sort of emotions is fear that's driving it. And keeping up with the Joneses is a phrase that I use a lot with clients, especially when trying to move them towards thinking about investing. It's about delayed consumption. So you're delaying consumption now to be able to consume in the future. But if you're keeping up with the Joneses and you're just trying to buy the next big car or upgrade the house, etc., then that's going to be detrimental to your financial future. And so there's that narrative around delaying consumption. But I think as consumers, we're constantly being marketed to. So I think that's one of the most difficult things for people to do is practice that delayed gratification, if we're going to term it as that. But then even with people who aren't into the flashy stuff, there is almost a conditioning that Well, surely the only thing it would be mad not to try and grow my business, or why not just keep growing my number? And the idea of have I got enough comes up.
So already I can sort of feel in what you say, we're into that, you pull one thread and you get everything
Yeah.
else, right? You talk about, it's very hard to break it down because we are talking about, I guess, what some people would call a paradigm, a whole world view, a whole way of thinking about ourselves and our work and our money in society. So it's really hard to just pull one bit and say it's this or it's that. Let me offer some thoughts and we'll see where we go. Yeah, we're sold to all the time. I mean, there have been stats on this. Just the number of adverts we consume or the number of adverts we're exposed to has increased massively now. They're everywhere. They're everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. So not just are you bombarded with advertising about consuming, I would say there's a sort of a meta message. It's not just there's this and there's this. The sum total of all of that marketing and advertising and how it's done, whether I buy this or that or neither, are constantly telling me that my role is to buy stuff and what society is about is buying stuff. And that whether I buy this product or not, I'm surrounded by pictures of happy people who've bought this or used this product. So I think there's the advertising of products, which absolutely is a reflection of this culture. But then there's this powerful message that the way to be happy, healthy, beautiful, sexy, fulfilled is through buying stuff. It's constant. And we need to see that because that makes us feel that we're consumers. Imagine if we received that much messaging every day about our role as citizens. I mean, just imagine we didn't have that and we had as much money spent on telling us, actually, shape your neighborhood. Talk
Mm.
about what's important. It would be completely different. The thing you say about consuming and investing, so for people who have got some discretionary money, which we know is not everybody, and actually the story affects different people in different ways. But yes, one thing is with your money, do you consume now? Do you buy stuff now? But then there's still the question of what would I buy? I mean, apart from staples, of course, we need food, we need shelter, we need basic clothing. But beyond that, what do we buy and why? What is the promise? What do we think we get from the stuff that we buy? This is where we get into the psychology. And again, advertising is persuading us in incredibly skillful psychological well that we'll get something we really want by buying this. So I think we need to look about what is the hope, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Usually when we buy shit, there's something we want and we can dive into that. And the piece about investing is the same. If I think of myself as a consumer, I use my money, again, whether I think, well, I'll be able to consume more or have more money in the future, that's great. But there's a massive growth in the question of ethical and social and environmental investment. What would it be like to invest as a citizen or use money? And if I'm lucky and privileged enough to have a surplus of money, think, how can I use that as a citizen for my own good and the betterment of my society? So I guess what I'm saying, Shabba, is at every point whether I'm investing money, saving money, spending money, in ways I often don't notice, I'm really wrapped up in this paradigm of consume because it will give you something that you want, but we're often very unclear and confused about what is it I actually want and what is it I think I'm going to get through the new this, the new that, the whatever. And I think it's deliberately confusing to keep us consuming and chasing something. So I'll say one last example and then over to you to see where we go. Um, I was going to say laugh. I don't laugh. I kind of scoff in a fairly angry way at car adverts because every car advert pretty much shows you're the only car on the road. There's no traffic jams. You have freedom. You have space. You have beautiful scenery. And we all know logically that's not what happens when you drive a car. But we are not sold the car. We are sold, I would say, something about an association with freedom, autonomy, space,
Mm.
mountains, nature. The very thing that gets destroyed the more cars we buy is the promise that's associated with buying a car. And so
Yeah.
I would argue with nearly all consumption, very often we're driven because we want to satisfy something, and we have a
Mm.
confused hope that the object, the thing, will give us that. But deep down, we already know that it won't.
This is so interesting. I was literally talking to a client last week,
Mm.
very high executive working for a tech company on hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, plus bonuses, plus stock, incredibly driven, talented individual.
Mhm.
And we started talking about what does he want help with? And there were questions about have I got enough for retirement, etc. And that's the concern. And how am I doing my money right? And we just started digging, just started asking questions. And then it started coming out, well, I've got 4 cars. And the example that he gave was, well, I bought my son who's just turned 17 a nice little small car. And he said, he hasn't passed his test, so I could easily use his car and sell mine, which is not needed. He had a nice Audi something. I'm not a car person. And he was like, but I can't be seen driving that to play football with the guys. They know me as the VP and I've got a certain image, and what would it say about me if I was driving around in my son's, Kia? And we were talking about, well, retiring early and putting more money away and just conversations about making choices. And it became so apparent how much he was tying up in the car in terms of in relation to his status
Yeah.
and his job. So that's clearly one thing that people are or think that they're getting
Yeah.
from their consumption. I think there are a lot of status purchases, which is one thing that I see a lot amongst my clients, is that there is a desire, and almost it feels like there's a need to purchase things in order to keep a social standing or prove to the world how well you're doing.
Mm,
That would
mm,
that would be one of the most common
mm,
ones I find.
mm, mm. Yeah. And so we're straight back into the money work and these unconscious psychological projections. So let's just try to make some links here,
Mm.
and then we take it another step further. We know from the money work that we all have a strong tendency to unconsciously project, unconsciously entangle certain qualities that we both don't want to admit in ourselves and want but don't feel connected to. So so-called positive and negative qualities, right? We've talked about this in many other episodes. So we know if I don't feel truly powerful, truly okay, truly rich, truly impactful, truly impressive in me, then I'm kind of looking for a quality. I'm looking for that quality. I want to feel really powerful and good and like I make an impact and I'm in my right place in the world. Of course, we all want that. And to the extent that we don't, we will very often tie the thing we want with money, the having of money. And in this case, the using of money we have to buy certain objects that act as symbols. So I believe with my Kia, I'm a less impressive man, or people will feel I'm less impressive than with my Audi. And people do that with houses and cars and clothes. And notice he didn't say, I really love my Audi,
Yeah.
right? That's different. So you're absolutely right. One of the things that will drive consumption is, we might say, a projection or a search for qualities about being impressive, high status, blah, 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 blah. Do advertisers know this? Of course they do. Why do we only get sexy, good looking, happy people in adverts? Because that's what we're all chasing. Adverts do not have normal looking people saying, remember the first truth of Buddha.
Mhm.
Whatever you have in life, there will be suffering. You cannot escape suffering through material objects. But if you really want an Audi, buy an Audi. They don't say that because we wouldn't buy a bloody Audi's a nice car, right? They don't remind us of the truth that what we're really looking for doesn't lie in the objects. They manipulate that. And they also manipulate many, many other things. So they know human search for freedom, human search to be different, accomplished, fulfilled, happy, sexy, peaceful, calm. My other pet hate at the moment is I get a load of adverts for chemicals you can put with your washing powder to make it smell like nature. So now you don't just need your washing powder, you need your washing powder plus this, plus this. So you're putting more and more.
The scented beads.
I'm going to swear on our podcast, more and more fucking chemicals in your washing machine that go into the water, because all the advert is it smells like nature. Like it smells like what happens if you actually hang your washing out in the garden. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's not about status. That's about we long for a connection with the natural world, for green things, for living things, for breeze. But they don't say, hey guys, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, hang your washing out outdoors. It'll take you a few extra minutes. It might sometimes rain, but your washing was, no. We can sell you stuff through more chemicals, even though the chemicals will be bad for the very thing you're trying to connect to. So there's a convoluted logic, just like we're exploring always on this podcast, the thing that we think money or consumption will give us, it's never quite there.
Do you want to just, because we've got more and more new listeners joining.
Well, that's good. Welcome. I don't always swear and get so ranty, new listeners. So I hope you like it. But if you don't, I don't always do this.
But we've touched upon a few things here in regards to like our projections, and
yes,
we haven't sort of recapped for a while. But do you want to spend a couple of minutes on explaining that idea of projection, and maybe what someone who finds themselves in that situation around the consumption might be able to do?
Okay, I'll do that if that's helpful. And then I definitely wanted to go on and talk more about how can we reframe growth in a more healthy way. Looking at the time, maybe that then becomes a two-parter. See how we go.
We can see how we go.
Okay. The first thing is welcome if you're a new listener, and thank you if you're an existing long-time listener. And I hope the recap will be useful. We have talked about this before, and particularly actually the first, I think, 6 episodes of the whole podcast, we go more into the kind of theory here, and then we touch on it. So if you're interested, please listen back to that. It's a complicated idea, but I'll try and explain it. And when we get it more in, it's the difference between wisdom and information, actually. I'll give you the information now, but when you get it, it's not just a new way of thinking. You really feel something. So let's say, like many of us these days, I don't really feel as connected with nature, space, kind of just that sense of peace and connection with the natural world as I would like, right? You know, I'm busy, I'm working, I'm in front of a computer, I'm stuck in my commute. There's an experience as part of my humanity that I'm not in touch with or not able to experience as fully as I'd like. And often I'm not conscious of that, or it's a bit fuzzy. And so what I really need is to find a way in my life to connect with that. And that doesn't need to be to do with money. So even if I have very little money and don't live anywhere, you know, in beautiful nature, chances are I can still walk for a few minutes and find a tree and a patch of grass and sit there and take my shoes off, touch the tree, look at the insects. Now, this might seem a bit strange, but if one of the things I need is that connection and that sense of nature and that wonder, I can find that with and without money. Similarly, in your example of the person who wanted status and power, it's like I'm looking for something. But what I really need to do is think, well, how do I show up in my life, whatever my life is like, with power? Where am I giving up my power? Where am I telling myself I'm not good enough or not high status enough? How can I show up really feeling good and solid in myself? So the idea is what we're looking for in the end is always in us. And whether we have money or not, we can always take some steps to connect more with it. But that requires some consciousness and sometimes some courage. So what we often do is we don't see it that way. We think, well, if only I had money, then I don't know what, I could have more nature in my life. I could climb mountains. I would buy the washing powder. Or if only I had money, I would have an Audi rather than my 25-year-old VW. And then I would feel powerful, and then I would feel high status. So this is the basic idea of what we call projection, is imagine unconsciously the thing I'm looking for, which is always a human experience part of me and is always possible for me with and without money. I imagine it's tied up with money, or in this case, with using my money to buy or consume more stuff. And what we say on the podcast is two things. Number one, that's always a false logic. It never really gets us what we want. So if I have an Audi or a Rolls Royce, that doesn't actually put me in touch with feeling high status. So I'll still keep looking for the thing I'm looking for. And then I might buy a private jet or another car, or because I'm always looking because I don't see it's in me. The moment I see it's in me and I do whatever's needed, and that's another conversation, to think, do you know what? It actually doesn't matter what my friends at football think. And it doesn't matter if people compare me. I know I am integrated, powerful man, whatever my salary, whatever my car, then you can't take that away from me. I can go bankrupt or cycle to work. It's in me. And then actually the truth is, in that moment, I actually am more powerful than some of these insecure guys with their big cars. So that's the idea of
Yeah.
projection. And in the work, there are steps we can do. And if people are interested, listen to episodes and come on one of my workshops. We teach you first how to spot what you're projecting and tying up. And then even more important, how to connect with that thing you're looking for that's never in the money.
Mm.
And I guess, Shabba, what we're saying today is consumption and the consumer identity is created in two directions. One is corporations, advertisers, marketers, money men who want us just to keep spending and buying. And so they will carefully manipulate us to think that we should do that to get what we want. And on the other side is our own individual psychology, where we're not maybe taking true responsibility to access. And then when those two meet, guess what? You're just going to get consumption, more stuff, more consumption. Even though I consume more, even though we all have more than our parents and grandparents could have dreamed of, we're not happier. We're not more satisfied. We don't feel more powerful. We don't feel more free. We don't. And meanwhile, the planet's burning. So it ain't working. And we need to understand how we get in that consumer story. And over to you, but perhaps in the follow-up episode, we can talk about how to shift it, which I
Yeah.
think would be very helpful for people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, and I think that's
recap?
like mighty beneficial for past and sort of new
I
listeners,
hope
just
so.
because we haven't covered that in a while, and that's the sort of the bedrock of the
Yeah.
work that we do, and something that has always helped me to challenge that belief are the counter examples that we see in the world. So when we're tying something up in money, that inequality that we're looking for, whether it's power, status, influence, whatever it is that we're sort of searching for, that human quality, and we can spot it in people that didn't have a lot of money. For me, that's always been the most powerful reminder that it ain't in the money. It's never been in the number. And that's quite liberating. And I would strongly urge people to just take some time out and look for those sort of counter examples of people that have got the quality that you admire or the feeling that you're trying to capture, and see it in, historical figures. There might be even people in your network that have a sense of conviction and strength and power, but don't necessarily have a lot of money, but are truly comfortable in their own skin.
I think that's really helpful. Let me briefly add, since it's a recap, two more examples of that. So yeah, absolutely. Whatever it is, I think through consuming or buying the car, the holiday, the suits, stuff, I think I'm getting, notice how there are people who seem to really have that quality with and without money, with and without cars. Include yourself earlier in your life, because very often people will say, do you know, I felt most free or most courageous or most powerful or most fun at this stage of my life. And actually, I didn't have as much money then as I do now. So notice even yourself. And the other counterexample, which is maybe harder to spot, but worth thinking about, notice when you really look how many people who seem to have it all with money don't necessarily feel free or powerful or whatever. And that's not about mocking them, because they're just humans also trying to be happy. but it's also not about projecting. So when I do see the guy with the posh car, it's very easy for me to assume he has everything or even be intimidated about him. We did an episode on that, didn't we? Why do I act weird with people with more money? Actually, see their humanity and see almost certainly they're struggling with whatever, and they may not at all have the qualities that you think they do. And all of that's very useful. I hope it's a useful recap. I feel there's more we can go into the consumer story.
Okay, Tim, 45 minutes in, and I think that might be a good place to pause and continue this conversation on growth and consumption and pick it up again next week. Just for those that are listening today, what are we going to move on to next week?
Yeah. So in the next episode, we're going to ask this question. So in a more healthy, conscious, we might say life-centered world or relationship to life, what do we want to grow and how do we grow it? If we're saying that just stuff, money and numbers isn't the helpful thing to grow and is often based on confusion, what would be a more wise or healthy thing to grow? So we'll look at that.
All right, Tim. Well, you go and cool down, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Cheers, Shabba.